Welcome to this edition of Going Deep with me, Richard Mills, and we will interview Darcy Lalonde, one of the nation's most successful entrepreneurs, active across, certainly in the Philippines, but across the Asia-Pacific region. He has built sizable businesses very successfully. So we'll have an interesting session with him. Please welcome Darcy Lalonde to Going Deep with me, Richard Mills. Well, Darcy, really nice to have you. I'm so glad you're taking the time here. There'll be a lot of interesting things that, you can share and help others in their own careers and lives. So really good to have you, Darcy.
It's great to connect again, Richard. And I guess it's been such a crazy year, and it literally is almost 1 year, I guess, since things started changing for us all. But I'd like to think maybe we all appreciate things a little bit more about what we had and where we are and where we're going. So great to catch up and hope we can chat through and give some interesting topics for some folks.
Absolutely. Well, Darcy, can you maybe start off by just telling us a short history of yourself and your career and just a bit about who you are?
Well, I guess, one of the things that I'm a big believer in is, I guess as a kid, I played a lot of sport. And whilst I did well in school, I wasn't probably in the top 10% of the class. But, I think once, taking my sport forward was very much, a big part of my career and the philosophies that I took forward. So ended up, dangling around sport and trying to play some hockey and because that's what we do in Canada. And ended up going to university and interestingly enough, and I think it's one of the things that is interesting that many young people do ask me is how did I pick the university, what degree, what things did I go into? And I guess I chose engineering and then realized I hated physics and chemistry. So that lasted a year and then ended up in accounting. So going from a hulking 6'2" power forward in hockey to an accountant was an interesting shift, but definitely something that I think is still a great education and business. Everything is still about numbers. It's still about revenue and expenses and profits. And so it was a great foundation for me to get through that. And started up, and that was in Regina, Saskatchewan. So I was born in a place that right now is, I guess, minus 32 degrees this week. And got through university. And like many people in Saskatchewan, I actually worked for the government after that, which I worked for the Saskatchewan Highways and Transportation as an accountant. And I guess, as you know, Richard, I've always been, I guess, seen as a bit of a entrepreneur. And probably a surprise that my first job were really working for the government.
I never dreamed you started as an accountant working for the government. And just for people outside who might not know, Regina, Saskatchewan, this is in the middle of Canada and in the middle of the agricultural heartland, let's call it, of the nation. And not a place, it's a wonderful place, but it's very flat, wheat fields forever, and not a place that people think, you end up as an entrepreneur in Asia. It might be a stereotype. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, no, that would probably be an accurate depiction. And I think when I took my kids there the first time we were driving, and my son said, "Dad, all there is wheat and telephone poles.
Yeah.
That's all there is along the highway."
Sure. So and then, okay, so hockey, you played hockey for a little while. And I think you were pretty good at it. I mean, as a big guy, athletic and everything, but also for a short stint, how did you, I know you did some wrestling for a while and then ended up in the IT business. That's quite a transition, Darcy. How did that work?
Yeah, no, and then that, I guess I went through as a kid, as a lot of Canadians do, dreaming the dream of playing in the National Hockey League
Yep.
And actually went quite far. I went through playing some junior and very competitive hockey and great experiences, which I continue to share that philosophy with my own kids, and then moved, really realized I wasn't going to make the show. I wasn't going to make the big bucks and be a superstar. So that's one of the things we used to do is hang around the wrestling circuits a bit. And there was a circuit in Western Canada called Stampede Wrestling, which, and I know anybody who knows anything about wrestling, they know these guys. There was some fantastic wrestlers in the group, Bret the Hitman Hart, Jim the Neidhart, the British Bulldogs. These were some of the Davey Boy Smith and Dynamite Kid. These guys were some of the most famous wrestlers in the world with the WWF after that was bought. So I was lucky enough sitting in Regina that, we used to watch a bit of this wrestling, and I used to go yell at the bad guys and stuff. And they picked me out of the crowd and said, "Hey, why don't you do some wrestling with us?" And
Right.
It was pretty cool. I came out of the crowd and, not to share any secrets, but this might have been orchestrated. It may have been, may have been something that was set up a little bit, and came in the ring and did a little bit of wrestling for a while, and I guess I got to know again another tough lifestyle of these guys, and you do again see the documentaries on the wrestlers and the fact that many of them die relatively early deaths, because it's a very, very tough world they live in, and it was an experience that it made me appreciate hockey in terms of the organization and the safety standards and things that we did have. But it was a great time when you're young. I guess I was in my gap between high school and university, and some kids go to Europe and travel Europe. I guess I traveled around as in a van and wrestling in Western Canada.
Interesting. Jeez, I had no idea. And just again, for people who might not know, but junior league hockey in Canada, that's a fairly elite level. What is it? That would be called one or two steps down from the NHL, Darcy?
Yeah, I guess it's mostly where the young kids, the 18-year-olds, are drafted, and the real good ones go from 18 right into the NHL and into the big show. So it's like I said, and I think in Canada, and when you're from Saskatchewan, where I was from, it's very cold. Yeah. We didn't have gadgets back in the 70s and 80s. Sure. So we played hockey. That's really what we did, and that was our passion and our social existence, and so it was a really wonderful time and great memories, and I think that's what sport often gives our children.
Okay, Darcy. So the transition from government accountant to the next stage in your life, running an IT business, I think maybe was the next thing. How did that work?
Well, I guess no matter what you do, when I started with Saskatchewan Highways, for me, it was a great opportunity. And this was really, I guess this was 1988. And, this was the beginning of networks, local area networks, Novell, really the beginning of microcomputers and all that. So, because because again, a lot of people ask, how did you go from an accountant into IT? And interesting enough, the way I got into it was by testing the IT guys. So I was the financial guy testing the systems, like email. Email was a big thing back then. We didn't actually believe in it. We were wondering if it was secure, and so I ended up being part of the EDP auditing team. And I used to jokingly say I was so annoying that the ID department hired me to manage their projects because I wouldn't pass any of them. So if you can't, I guess they decided if you can't beat them, join them, sort of thing. And moved over and got involved in IT, became a netware engineer with Novell. Got quite technical. And I guess this is, again, where I still have some, I wouldn't say sympathy, but I have some empathy in terms of, the latest millennial comments and how, this new generation is different. Well, when I was coming up, we were working with the mainframe people. And I was this young, snot-nosed kid, coming up with his microcomputers and networks and emails and I remember a lot of the same comments that the millennials get today, was also directed really to that new generation of computer people that were coming up. So, and again, I guess that, as we go through and talk, I mean, one of the great things that I think is important in any job you do is to, really show the passion for what you do, which, I was so lucky to have the job. I was very excited. I moved up very quickly into in the government, even though normally it's not a place where you can rise. I was lucky enough, but one of the keys in my career has always been, to try to find a mentor or try to find somebody that, you believe can share their experience and really, sponsor you through your early career. And at the highways, I have a couple of bosses I still know. I was even back then relatively considered, difficult to manage because if I believed in something, I was very vocal about it and always was quite amenable to agreeing to disagree and doing what you're told, but certainly always felt that, if I should have an opinion and that's why I was there. So, I went right up to being, one of the directors of IT in the Saskatchewan highways within a couple of years. And my mentor was very upset because I decided that, Regina was a small place and I wanted to discover the rest of the world, and made a decision to move to Vancouver, which, I guess for a lot of Canadians, particularly in the middle of the country, you either move to Toronto, which is where you are, Richard, or you move to Calgary or Vancouver. And I guess, back then it was more Vancouver. I moved to Vancouver as the manager of support services for the BC Securities Commission. So again, doing a role which was really around the governance of the stock exchange and kind of a crown corporation, and really got involved with that. Moved out to Vancouver, to the big city, and spent about 3 years with BC Securities Commission, and then there was a software that was starting, an enterprise software, which now has become relatively famous, called SAP. Back then there was very few people that knew anything about it. And I guess, one of the things that I had been managing people a lot in my career already, even for a fairly young fella. And I decided I wanted to go into consulting, and I didn't want to manage people. I wanted to take a break. So I got an offer to do this, what we called FICO, so finance and controlling, and having my CPA and having an IT background, I was able to sort of bring those together in the consulting world. So I was one of the first certified SAP finance consultants in Canada with SAP.
Is that right?
Yeah, and so and worked with pulp and paper and fishing companies and Chevron, Texaco, and some of the AT&Ts and some of the biggest companies in the world developing finance processes and consulting. And so I joined a company called ISMBC, which was actually part of TELUS. It was part of the telco group. Back then it was called BC Tel. Went in and was doing consulting, and I loved consulting. It was great to create these solutions and work with people. And this was back in transformational times with enterprise software, single view of the truth. And lo and behold, what happened was they decided that I shouldn't just be a consultant. I should head up this group. So once again, and it was again an interesting one, because my boss actually came forward and said he wanted to learn the system and the application like I had. So basically what he did was give me his job and said, you take my job, I'm going to step back. We built up one of the biggest SAP consulting companies in Canada at the time. And I guess that was from, 1993 up till 98, 99. But that's when I started traveling a lot. Lo and behold, we did a bunch of work with a company some people have heard of in Manila called the Asian Development Bank.
Okay.
So, we went out. I was actually brought in by SAP to try to get the Asian Development Bank to utilize their software. And as it turned out, they chose a different software. But I did get to meet some fantastic people while I was out in Manila and Singapore, including the head of SAP Asia back then, again, a fellow by the name of Les Heyman. And again, an example where I think, sometimes putting the effort into building relationships and showing your passion and whatnot to people, even though we didn't get the Asian Development Bank project, Les Heyman asked me to start up a company and come to Asia because he needed good, smart consultants to come in. And his dream was to have, I guess, folks like myself come in and actually train local teams. So this was, back when there was very few local consultants. And, I guess that's in 1999, I decided to start a company. And I think, Richard, I'm not even sure you were aware, the company was actually based in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So we started up there and built up in Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Singapore, and Australia, with myself and a couple of crazy Dutch guys that I had met through the Asian Development Bank. And I guess that was the beginning of my entrepreneurship, where we actually built that up again to be one of the biggest players of SAP consulting in Asia, and sold that to a company in Singapore, and that was in 2001. So I came out in '99, and then sold that to a Singaporean company in 2001, and And as has been the case for me, and it seems is that once I sell the companies, I don't necessarily stay for long term after. And again, it was another example where, they wanted to take it, it's their asset. They moved ahead. And I guess that's where, I met you, Richard, was when I was with Arinzo.
Okay.
Back in 2001, we were doing SAP, but it was all, it was very much HR. And again, human resources, I had always been a finance and supply chain expert. And, I thought it was absolutely ludicrous to think that in Asia back in 2001 was not spending a lot of money and effort on human resource platforms. It was more about supply chain and technology, more so than really working on the human capital side and the human experience. So I remember I got a call from a Belgian guy who was the CEO of Arinzo, and he asked me to start up with them. And again, it was one of my former employees, a Dutch guy, who put him in touch, with me. I was on a sabbatical, traveling around Vietnam and having a good time, not thinking I would go back to work right away. And he somehow convinced me to start up. And it was interesting because although he wanted me to run Asia, I don't think he actually believed it was a market he would be successful. What he needed was somebody to help him run Canada.
I see.
So at this point, I actually had a portfolio, which was, the executive director of Asia Pacific and Canada, which made no sense at all, of course.
Right.
But you can imagine in 2000, 2001, I had offices in Toronto and Singapore, and that was when SARS hit. Right?
Okay.
So, I guess after reflecting the pandemic with COVID, SARS was the first time we had a warning about these types of viruses and things. But we started with Arinzo and again ended up in all the countries across Asia, and we had more than, what did we have, about 1,200 people by the time 2011 came, when we actually sold the business to Northgate. And I guess 2006 was when we came into Manila and developed the big delivery center. And that's really, I think, Richard, where I've really leveraged the Philippines in my career is with the great talent base, the cost-effective resources, the great attitudes, the passion. And since then, I've really been using the Philippines as a base of just a knowledge base and passion and people to have them really provide services all over the world out of Manila.
Interesting. And now, while you were with Arinzo, this became Northgate Arinzo, which at the time was one of the world's major HR technology companies. I think it was the major player in its segment. It was later sold to KKR, Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts, which in anybody who's comes from finance who's listening, this is the big name in global finance or investment banking. And so that was quite a success. Now, during that time, this Belgian fellow you mentioned, I met him through you, and I could tell he was a very dynamic fellow. Also, as is typical for guys who start global businesses from scratch and grow them, kind of a demanding type of person. And I mean that as a compliment, because of course you've got to be a demanding person. But for people listening who want to learn from a demanding person or feel they have a demanding boss, how did you work so well with that person? Because you later became a friend of his. He now supports a lot of your ventures ever since. So what did you do? Because I'm sure there was other people who maybe didn't get along with him, Darcy. And how did you succeed in that relationship?
Yeah, and I think that was interesting, Richard, because I remember you took us to a PBA game,
Yes.
Philippine Basketball Association, and Joss, and I think Europeans in general can be, certainly a lot more direct than sort of the traditional North American type executive. And I think Belgians in general, if I had to stereotype, they're very direct.
Sure.
And I guess it was something that I always took pride in, because even the partner I had in what's DFI Consulting, which was the first company I started in Asia, was a Dutch guy, and he was known as being one of the craziest guys. And I was the straight guy, and Jan, his name was Jan, and he was out there. He was extreme, but very intelligent. Always found that it's nice to learn from these people, and I guess it was one of the things that I've always been able to do is that, these demanding bosses, I guess the first thing is I don't get intimidated by it. And I think to a certain extent that probably doesn't hurt my physical structure, being a big fella. They can't intimidate me very easily physically. And I don't think, when you get into your career in life, whilst I was a great enforcer in hockey, I didn't ever really have a situation in my business career where I had to drop my gloves and have a fight with anybody. So it's relatively irrelevant, but I think it's, with tough bosses, as you said, oftentimes they are the very successful people, because they demand the most out of people. They demand the most out of themselves. And if you remember Joss, he was going 24 hours a day. The mind never shut down. He was always on the go. And I think, again, you need to believe in yourself. And I think, some people may have implied he was a bit of a bully. I used to always say, as a kid, I used to love bullies, because I always loved to be the one who said, if you're going to bully somebody, come and bully me. And be able to, empathize and really turn the situation around. And I think it's about respect, Richard. I think at the end of the day, Joss and I have had it's a 20-year, we just realized this year, it's 20 years that we've worked together. And I think I probably am one of the longest executives that have worked with him. And I think my background as an accountant and knowing numbers and understanding the business, but it's being on top of your business and I think being, having integrity and even if you're having bad days and you have bad news, to sometimes you got to bring it up and work through it. And I think, as I tell my people, is don't come to me with your problems. I'll come with some solutions as well. And he's, as you've mentioned, he's still involved with many of the businesses I'm with today. His net worth is quite a bit higher than mine, but he's had a fantastic career, and it's been really an enjoyable relationship. Being involved with him over all these years.
Sure, certainly. And just for background for people listening, the person we're talking about, if I read Darcy, I'm not going to quote, I don't know the exact numbers, but I read he sold his one business for $440 million or euros, one of those. And this is other businesses. So this is a very successful, built from scratch person. Now, Darcy, you've also developed a lot of Filipinos. And now if you're the type of guy who can handle, doesn't get intimidated. But sometimes, you mentioned Filipinos are such a sweet, nice bunch of people. They can get intimidated sometimes. Now, how do you develop your people to be able to work with, tough, very direct, demanding international people? What kind of advice or guidance do you give?
Yeah, and I think that, to your point, Richard, is something that, and I know a lot of international people who come in to Asia, shall I say, with a one size fits all type of management style. And
yeah,
what I can say is that, managing in Singapore is completely different than managing in the Philippines, which is different than managing in Malaysia, and et cetera. Yep. And I think it's maybe a combination of things. Is that I think as Canadians, I do believe we are a more empathetic group of people. I grew up in humble humble beginnings. I think going back to Joss and my Belgian friend, he came from a farm.
Really?
I think self-made people, we have a respect for each other.
Yeah.
We didn't have the fancy car going to university, and he used to tell the story about how he didn't even have a car, and he had a friend with him that used to drive him to university all those years ago, and he was still his friend. So it's I think as Canadians, we do have that ability to adapt. Some people have called me a chameleon, and I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not, but I do believe that, and this is, I guess, pulling the other side of being Canadian, but I think the other side is in sport. You always have to learn how to use, to optimize your strengths, minimize your weaknesses, and you want to bring the best out in your people. And I think as a manager, I've always wanted to, I don't treat everybody the same. And I remember there used to be a lot of international folks and Europeans that would say I was very hard on them, whereas I was seen as very, very, understanding and easy to get along with, perhaps by some of the local communities. And that wasn't for any other reason than being selfishly trying to get the most I could out of people. And, sure. And I think Filipinos in general are, they want to understand. Their passion is second to none. And that's where I always, one thing I do love is that when we've got a big job at hand, nobody tells me, oh, it's getting late and all this. We roll up our sleeves, we get the pizzas, we get some beer, and we get the job done. And those are the kind of people that I really embrace. And I think people know that, and I take care of people that do that for me. And as you've known, Richard, over the last 20 years, I've got this group of great Filipino managers and executives that continue to work with me. And I've been very blessed to have them, because, everything I've given them, they've also gave back to me in many spades. So I think it's again a management style where I think a lot of people have felt that, I'm a very effective manager because I can motivate people. And I think that's an absolute key, that people are motivated, and if they are, they'll go to the wall for you. If they're not, they'll find ways that perhaps don't create a successful path forward.
Okay, so in addition to working with different people and working with, they also seem to follow you from one business venture to the next. Now, the one that I remember, and people listening from the BPO industry would remember, Shore Solutions, which was later sold to an Australian group and became a core for their very successful operation in Philippines. And then more recently, Synchrony Global is another one, more tech focused. I understood your SAP roots maybe. and that was recently merged, sold, however, to a US company called Rizing. Now, when you started up the Synchrony Global group, you brought most of your people with you from other ventures. Is that how it worked, Darcy?
Yeah, and again, I guess that was after after Northgate Arenzo or NGA, and as you mentioned, it was again working with KKR was really an interesting time, and I learned so much.
That's a difficult boss too, though, right?
Again, you can philosophically, I'm not sure we saw always eye to eye, because they are very driven to the net worth of themselves. I think there's more to life than that. I think that to create sort of a shared view is also got some value to it, and I think, Richard, at this point in my career, and maybe we'll hit on it a bit later, is that I think what's important is the legacy you create and leave. And when you're younger, you're so full of that energy to get to the top and make some things happen. And I think over the last little while, I think a little bit more about the legacy I'm going to leave and the people that you work with. So I think KKR was such a great learning ground for me to understand how to do M&A, mergers and acquisitions, and how to build up strategies and plans and exit strategies. So to your point, I guess it was from Arenzo on where I decided, what I really love doing is starting companies and building them to a certain size, and then letting them go. I mean, it's kind of like your teenagers getting through a certain side and then turning them free. And so KKR was an extremely interesting time. I sat in the boardrooms of some of the most famous people and Van Gogh paintings behind me, and it really was an interesting time. And this is a boy from Saskatchewan that let's face it, Saskatchewan is considered the very socialist kind of left wing province in Canada, and here I was working with the barbarians at the gate, which is what KKR was known as. And I did work from 2012 or 2007 till 2012 with them. So I did stay quite a while with them. And we did build up, as you said, Richard, we really did build up probably the largest human capital and HR consulting company in the world at that time. And then after that, of course, when KKR give you a non-compete in the SAP space, you don't compete with them.
No.
So when you're in Manila, what else to do but start a call center? So that was with Shore, and that's where I met Jonathan Smith, who was again. My expertise was not in BPO call centers, because it's a different world. The true call center side of the business, and I think sometimes that's the first step, is recognizing what you know and what you don't know, and so I joined forces with Jono, and again, you met Jono. He's a big rugby Australian. I used to call him the godfather of call centers, because he'd been in Manila as long as I had, and we really built again something I think we're very proud of was with Shore. We went from 200 to 2,000 in 2 years. That was we did some M&A where we bought Rainmaker, which was a US based company, which really gave us a big chunk of business and something to build upon. And but when we built Shore, that's again where, as you said, Richard, I started again bringing in my, the middle management that I had worked with and very successfully in Manila. So started bringing them in, and that's again where I brought in future partners of some of my new businesses like Figari. So Chris Butt was involved with things back then, and there's people that are still working for the companies today that I'm still involved with. They sort of jokingly say, Darcy, we know we know your strategy now. You start a business, you get us to join, you pay us less than you used to pay us. And then we have a lot of fun, we get really successful, and then you sell us. and then the evolution of the business carries on, and so for sure was really, and I think, Richard, we were very involved with you at the time with the Asia CEO. Was really a fantastic run. We really really enjoyed that. Met some more people that I brought into my I guess we'll call them ecosystem. In the old days, I used to call them my mafia, but I'm not sure if that's politically correct anymore. But it's a great group of people, and it's funny because some of them, and Lanny, which is my group CFO, I hired her in 1999, and she was 20 years old. She's still my group CFO. And, I sometimes forget she's not 20 anymore. She said, Darcy, I'm 40 some years old now. But, what a great blessing to have her and her family and all the people that I've met with her, and I think that's any businessman coming into the Philippines, make sure you get yourself a real good accountant, get a real good lawyer, a good legal advisory side, because business is different in the Philippines, and it is different in Thailand or Malaysia, and it's really important that you understand these local cultures, the local regulatory side, and that you get involved with the right people, because you don't want to get involved with the wrong people, because it can be very, very complicated after that.
Sure.
So yeah, Shore, we built that up, and off the side of Shore, I always kept a little bit of SAP business going, and once Acquire BPO bought that call center business, I sat down with the ownership there and said, look, you're not really into this SAP stuff. How about I'll take that back in the Philippines? Because it was really SAP who'd come to me, because that was the launch of cloud SAP with SuccessFactors, which is the HR cloud-based application. And they had really come to me to say, Darcy, with your expertise, knowing everybody in the region and in the HR space, how about you start a company? So this was another chance to spin out of Shore. Again, a great, Acquire BPO have taken that, and it's still going well. There's still, and Tanya and some great people are still there.
Yes, absolutely.
So it was again where, I went back into the regional view in Australia and New Zealand, and I think, went back and it was a little bit of a Blues Brothers episode where I said, let's get the band back together. And so I got, my top guy in Singapore and my top people in Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And we built out Synchrony, which was really an offshoot of Shore, where Shore was only the Philippines. The these other ones was again going as a regional play. And again, very proud. Within 1 year, we were voted by SAP as the top success factor partner in the region. So, again, it was wonderful times. Loved growing it. And then, of course, in my mind, I started thinking, okay, I want to be a global player. Because really, Synchrony was a lot like Arinzo. It was the building of Arinzo. And, I wanted to be a big global player, but, certainly at that point in time, needed somebody to come in and take that to the next level. And that's where, as you mentioned before, where Rizing came in and took that off my hands in 2019.
Okay.
So I spent last year through a transition year, and then I guess it was half of last year. Of course, the whole COVID situation made everything very difficult, and I guess I was lucky to have sold.
You were.
But I guess on the other hand, they've got deeper pockets, and I think they will be successful. They're still running well. The people that I am so close to are still there and working and enjoying the work they're doing. So yeah, I think this this entrepreneurial spirit that somehow happened between being a government worker in Saskatchewan has been something I really do enjoy. Of course, as you get older, I think you become less able to be managed. So I think some of the Rizing folks when they came in were very, very nice people, and they said, but reputation is that you're completely unmanageable. And I said, I don't think that's necessarily true, but I must admit that I enjoy being the guy sort of running the business, and that's where that's where I'm at in my career now. So it's probably me going back to corporate business is probably not going to happen.
Sure, I hear you. Once you've run your own business, boy, you never want to go back to. But very valuable. What most people do, working very diligently for other organizations. Darcy, you mentioned your work in Kuala Lumpur, Thailand, Singapore, so forth, all across the Asia region. Why do you seem to keep coming back to Philippines? And you spent, it seems, most of your time in that country. Your children were raised there. What was your what's the big deal about Philippines for you?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, Richard, because when I originally moved to Asia, I was in KL.
Yeah.
And so then it quickly became really obvious to my partners that every excuse that I could find, I would come to Manila. Now, it was also because I'd sold some great business with companies like Del Monte and some of the TDK and some really big, interesting companies. But I think the Philippines has always been the most welcoming of cultures. I think I felt that when I moved to Asia, I really wanted to be able to integrate and experience the cultures and people. And I found, in places like Malaysia, that I was hanging around with a bunch of expats, a bunch of foreigners, and found less that you transcended into the local environment. And what I loved about the Philippines is that very quickly had Philippine friends and peers. They're not just people working for me; it's also people that are at a peer level and some of the people you've had on your, people like Jovi, these are guys that
Jovi Hernandez.
we've been working together for 20 years. And you can phone these guys and we can have a discussion and we can work together. And I really, I guess maybe it's that Western business acumen that really is in the Philippines. So it was always my preferred place in terms of being comfortable and welcoming and fun. And I think, as you mentioned, then I ended up having some children in the Philippines, and very proudly, my two kids are half Filipino, and they're also very proud of their heritage and the friends and the people, and I love the and I really, now that I've spent some time back in Canada, where I guess with COVID I made the mistake of leaving, and it's really hard to get back right now. But you sort of appreciate that, the communal family side of the Philippines, and it's not just families, but extended families and friends, and people really do take care of each other, and families are so very close. And I think, Richard, maybe you also find that the relationship we have with our children is different than a Canadian relationship. I think I'd be very happy if my kids want to stay with me for a long time. I remember when I grew up, I couldn't wait to get out of the house, and I think my parents wanted me to get out of the house. So I think it's just a very, very kind, passionate, communal view. People taking care of each other, and I think I was lucky enough to meet the right people in Manila, and and building businesses. I know some people find it difficult in the Philippines as a foreigner, but I think it's really about the ecosystem and the people you surround yourself with, and you've also been there as long as I have, if not longer, and I think it's really a part of our DNA now.
It is, yes, and that's an interesting point. You say that in other countries, I've heard this over and over again, where you tend to, or expats, foreigners tend to spend a lot of their time with other foreigners and not mix as much with the local people in the different countries. Whereas in Philippines, that's definitely a difference, where you really do become part of the ecosystem and so forth. And your closest friendships, we have both found, I would say, Darcy, are with Filipinos. So that's a very good point. Darcy, maybe if I could ask you some questions, get back to some helping the young people and how they get to be promoted to senior leadership. What are the main reasons? Now, you have worked with a lot of people, hiring them and promoting them. What are the main reasons you promote someone into leadership positions, or especially senior leadership positions? What do they have to have for you?
Well, I think number one is passion. I mean, if you don't have that drive and passion, and you can see it in people's eyes, right? I mean, it's again something that when they come to work, they're bolted in. They really want to make a difference, given I'm a consultant and I'm supposed to be an expert in human capital and recruiting and onboarding and all these things, but the reality is I think your career, and this is something I've always tried to tell people when they join, your career is not a company's career. Your career is yours, and you make your career what you want it to be and what you dream it to be. And if you've got passion, you come to work every day. It's not hard to get up. You really have that drive, and the ability to just grab things. Sometimes don't ask permission, just do them, and these are the people that I try to find, and I must say, 20 years ago, I pulled a great group of young grads out, that are still with me, because they were really, for instance, in the Philippines, there's a reputation that people are perhaps more subservient, or they don't speak up, and they,
Yeah.
That I think if you give them a platform to be more collaborative, I want them to have that drive. I want them to take ownership, do things that are outside, and I think oftentimes many people would have said to me, Darcy, I can't believe you asked me to do that because I had no clue what to do. And I tell them that was part of the challenges. I know you didn't know, but I wanted a fresh perspective, and I wanted somebody who would come in and find a way forward, and really take that passion and drive. Don't ask, and I think this is a little bit the millennial crossroad, is that don't ask me for a new title. Don't ask me for a raise. Go and do stuff, show your stuff, show how great you are, and people will see that and reward you. And I guess that's, my reputation is, I do that because I think, also some people don't. And so for folks that put all that effort in and they feel they're not rewarded, well, the good news is you got lots of experience. You go out and you find somebody who will appreciate that. So, drive, dream, passion, take some chances. And you know what, if you make a mistake, admit it as soon as you can. And again, I'll have the highest level of respect for people that are willing to do that.
Sure. Okay. Darcy, you are an entrepreneur, and I would put you certainly among the top group of business starters and builders in the Asia Pacific region. Now, other people who want to be entrepreneurs, well, maybe my first question is, do you think most people can be an entrepreneur, or does it take a special type of person? And if so, what type of person would that be?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because, as we've talked, Richard, did I think I'd be doing today what I thought when I was, going to university? Probably not. And I think one of the things that I always tell, again, to young people is dream big, right? Set your dreams crazy big. Because I remember, my first dream was to work as a manager in Saskatchewan and make, a certain amount of money. I was done with that after about 2 years. And I think it's, dream to the sky. And, I think entrepreneurship is not something that you can strategically plan to get to, I think, as a young person, particularly if you're not, coming from a family of wealth, which I was not. I had a good, solid, middle-income Canadian family, but I think it's something that I think as you move through those first steps, I don't think you start out as an entrepreneur at 18 years old. You need to work in corporate worlds. You need to learn. You need to get your ego put in the right places, and grow from that. And now I think one of the traits of an entrepreneur, and I'm not sure, again, Richard, if this is a good thing or not, but I mean, I've probably throughout my life had a reputation of having issues with authority, and to challenge authority, to not always, go with the flow. And I think it is one of the traits of an entrepreneur is that, you are one of those people that is willing to challenge the status quo. You're willing to challenge authority. And, coming back to people like Joss, part of the reason why I think we got along so well is that I would challenge people that most people wouldn't challenge. And I think there's a path to this that I'm not sure I could ever map. But I do respect very much that the corporate time I did have in, because I think it's very important that you understand, those types of environments. And then, I don't think it's necessarily a better career, because I think for many people, it's not, it's not their comfort zone.
Sure.
I'll tell you, Richard, there was days at Shore. I mean, within 3 months, we went from almost bankrupt to to selling and having a great situation. So, it's very, it's very high stress business to get into.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that I always, because oftentimes people come to me and say they want to start a business. And what I tell people a lot of times is, if you can, start your business on the side of your day job. If you're passionate about something, and as long as it's not a conflict of interest, right? So, if obviously you can't be doing and selling and being counterproductive to your organization. But it's, again, an area where I've always told my people, if you want to do something on the side, just make sure it doesn't interfere with what you do. But if you've got some good ideas, start like that and start little businesses. And that's where, when I was in starting my career with BC Securities Commission, I had a company called SysTalk, which was basically setting up laptops and IT, and I did that on the side. And that was how I sort of learned, not only how to, market yourself and how to do this business, but also how difficult it is to make money and have a run rate that can support yourself while you set up these companies. Because if you don't have revenue, you can't live, and you can't eat. And I remember oftentimes, and this was, I used to joke with the KKR guys, we would come into a big board meeting and I'd say, wait, let me guess, we need more revenue and less expenses, and then we'll all be much happier. So if your revenue is not more than your expenses, it's probably not a time to be an entrepreneur. Okay. I think, Richard, you've also gone through this over the years. And,
sure.
And it can be tough. It can be tough sledding when you're out there on your own.
It is. That's good advice for entrepreneurs. I mean, if you want to, it's stressful, it's rewarding, but you're right. Some months you're on top of the world, and then the next one, or even the next day, you can be at the bottom because something will fall apart. So it really, you got to be used to and ready to handle that kind of emotional ups and downs. Darcy, another attribute I see in entrepreneurs and all successful leaders is salesmanship. Now, you strike me as a natural kind of a salesman type of personality. Do you think developing that skill is important, or is it overrated?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the first fundamental part of entrepreneurship is everybody is a salesman. Right?
Yes.
I mean,
I'm glad to hear you say that. Yes.
But it's interesting because when I was in the corporate world, I used to say, I am not a salesperson. I hate salespeople. Salespeople are, they're these kind of scummy people who sell anything. And of course, as you mature, you realize that salespeople are really important. But I think, that pure sales mode versus somebody who's, selling really expertise and knowledge and passion, because I think, it's really easy to sell something when you're super passionate about it and it's infectious, and the charisma, I think, is something that, that really comes to play, and probably was one of my, I was born with, thankfully, because it's hard to train on that. And I think, so in an organization, I truly believe that I don't like big sales organizations. I like that my entire organization, from the CFO to the clerks to the receptionist,
Yeah.
Everybody is a salesperson. Everybody is representing the company. Everybody knows that a good deal is good for the company. So I think, it's absolutely key, but I think what I've seen corporate companies do after I've left is sometimes think, that Darcy Lalonde, he doesn't spend enough on salespeople. If he hired 10 more salespeople and they all sold $1 million worth of stuff, they'd be a lot bigger. And I would say to them, that's not the market. KKR was an interesting dilemma because they believed I wasn't developing Singapore fast enough. And they said, if you hire 5 people in Singapore, 5 good salespeople, and give them these quotas, you're going to grow by double. And I said, no, we won't, because the market's not there. That's not how the Singaporean market works. And lo and behold, they hired a bunch of really good salespeople, really expensive salespeople. But they could not pay for their salaries, right? What they sold did not even pay for their salaries. So how do you make money as a business? And I think, that mindset has to be part of your core business as an entrepreneur, is that everything you do and every person who is part of your organization has to be able to drive business benefits and ways to see you making money. And so I think sales has evolved as well from that traditional, I guess, Richard, we come from a different era where people really did wear sales hats, delivery hats. And to be honest, now what you're seeing is sales is all about digital.
Yes.
And you know what? I'm really seeing it in my businesses today, where, in the Philippines, we're doing really well with Figari still. Because people ask me, Darcy, how's it going? What are you up to? And I say, well, you know what? I'm running my businesses in the Philippines, and what businesses are you in? I say, well, resorts and F&B and office leasing. And they look at me and say, oh, must be pretty tough times. Obviously through this pandemic, the hotel and food and beverage industry has taken a huge kick. And office leasing, working from home, what's going to happen to this? Are all these offices that we have with Figari, are they going to be empty, and is the whole thing going to be disrupted? The reality is that, digitally, I can run these businesses from afar. That's also because I have some great people on the ground in Manila that I can trust. But it's also about the whole digital marketing side. It's less about face-to-face marketing now, and a lot more to do with the digital side of sales. And it's something that I've gotten very involved with. And I, even for my group, have a digital marketing person now. Whereas I used to only have a legal accounting. Now I have this digital marketer, because everything you do, you're trying to figure out a way to get into the mindsets of people. And Kahuna, so I have to get the name out there, Kahuna Resort out in La Union. It's tough times because there's still lockdowns and there's still a lot of rules and regulations, but certainly we work again very closely with the regulatory side and try to be a proponent to get things healthy again, get things building again, get people working, because it's very, I think it's really tough times, and the Philippines does not have a social network like we do in Canada right now. And I'm very, I think, very blessed that I've maintained most of my staff. It's again an example, Richard, though, when I asked them and said, guys, can you take half salary? Can you take no salary? Because I don't have any money to pay you. And they said, boss, for you, we just want to keep working. We want to be part of it. And, we've gotten through the worst of it. and let's hope that with things that are coming with the vaccines and all the different things that we work through this.
Sure. And just for people listening, Kahuna Resorts is I would say that's the premier resort, I would say, in La Union, the surfing capital of the Philippines. What province is La Union, Darcy?
That's the province, La Union.
Oh, it is La Union. Okay, I get all mixed up sometimes. But it's just a fantastic place you have there that's done very well. And Figari, for people who don't know, is a shared office leasing operation that also has done very successful. I was focused on your other businesses, so didn't mention those ones. But so
Figari is really, as you said, Richard, it's really, I guess, the one that I'm getting more and more involved with again, because there's a lot of opportunities, because we not only do the office side, and again, an interesting dynamic that we strategically decided to only have office space in BGC.
Okay.
And I think that in hindsight, not that I think we were that smart, but in hindsight, I think with where the world is today, that's clearly an area where we maintain some stability through all of this. But it's also, what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of construction going on. So we also do a lot of construction. So we do office construction, we do building construction, and it's I can really see a lot of activity around this, and people are building for the future, obviously. But it's exciting times, and working with the team. With Figari, and again, coming back to that, my Belgian partner is also involved with that venture as well.
Okay.
So we're constantly looking at, again, ways that we can evolve Figari, and because it's fun, and that's I've actually had people approach me about Figari, about am I interested to exit that business, and of course I'm always, everything's for sale, right? And I mean, if somebody wants to pay enough, but I really enjoy the Figari team, and we're really on a great path. We're going to extend our services. We're looking at different avenues to get involved with, and I think it's also utilizing it as a bit of a corporate responsibility. And coming back again to the legacy that I'm hoping to leave. I keep forgetting I'm getting older, and I do want to have in the Philippines, because it's been such a big part of my life now for 20 years, that I really do hope that we can build some things and leave some legacies. Even things like I'm a director in the Ice Hockey Federation of the Philippines, right? And I still am trying to build sport in the Philippines, because again, and I keep coming back to it, but I believe it's so important for youth to be involved with sport. And my kids were so lucky that they got involved with football and soccer, and there's some great sport in the Philippines, and I think it's really important that through this pandemic as well, that somehow we don't forget that our youth need to be active. They need to be driven and extended and pressured, because that silly game you play when you're 10 years old and you put the pressure on a kid.
Yep.
Not only is it fun, is it the greatest memories you have as a family when you grow up, but it's actually teaching them how to deal with a little bit of stress, and and the good and the bad, and someday they're going to have a bad boss. Well, they probably had a bad referee in football, and then you can relate to these things. So yeah, I mean, I guess people keep asking, am I retiring? And absolutely not. I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep building to the very day I die. That's my that's my plan at this point. And my kids are last few years of high school. I know, Richard, again, your family, you've just taken them into the university and the after high school years, and I'll have to bounce ideas off you because, of course, this is it's all new territory, and I wish we could lock them all in at 10 years old, but they do grow up and they become good adults, and I guess that's what we're all about. Huh? That's the legacy.
It is. And remember that you only lease your kids, you don't own them. So eventually they'll be going off, on their own. But just a step back, Darcy, you mentioned a Figari focused on BGC. And yes, that was, for people outside, that is Bonifacio Global City, which many consider the new main business district for Metro Manila. That has been built. And yes, you certainly were one of the big movers there and have done very well there. Now, Darcy, maybe if I could ask you a bit about yourself. When you were growing up or in high school, did you consider yourself introverted or were you always extroverted? You mentioned you were good at school. Were you average, do you mean, or were you actually good? Were you more of a rule follower or rebellious? I think you already mentioned you were a bit rebellious, but how would you describe yourself as a young person?
Yeah, I think as pre-teens, I was a nice kid.
Okay.
And then and I guess a balance in life, because I was so passionate about sport that school I tended to do as well as I needed to do, which is maybe not a good thing, but it was if I needed to have a B average, I would get a B. If I needed to get an A, then I would get it. But it certainly wasn't my primary passion. My sport was my passion as a kid, and I guess that's why I bring it up a lot, because to be honest, I truly believe that I learned more from sport in terms of being a great manager of people, how to utilize strengths and weaknesses of a team, because it's no different, really. Team sports are really what business is. It's a bunch of people. You can't have 100 superstars in business because they don't get along, they don't collaborate well. You got to put a good team together, and so that as a kid, I think I definitely as a teen went through a very rebellious phase. I think if you ever talk to my parents, they would fully support that I wasn't the greatest teenager, and it was, I guess, this whole thing where I was testing authority, and I was, I really believe that you should challenge people, and you should challenge the norm, and I did. And again, though, I always understood that schooling was important, and I think just to irritate my parents, that was a little bit where I wasn't going to go to university, because I was going to play hockey.
I see.
And I didn't need school, so it didn't matter what my marks were. But I remember in grade 12, to get into engineering, you needed an 80 average. It's probably now you need a 95. And I remember my last semester, I worked like a dog, and I got 79.8%, which was 80, right? They would round it up. And which I did take my percentage up by quite a bit in the last semester. And my dad said to me, why didn't you just do that all the way along? And you could have been in the top of your class. And I said to him, what are you talking about? I studied perfectly the amount I needed to study. I didn't need to study 1 minute more. I got exactly what I needed to get where I wanted to go. And you know, and again, I think you know, academics now, the pressure on the kids is very different than it was through my era. You and I, Richard, we could get into university quite easily back in the day, particularly in Canada, whereas now it's boy, the marks and the pressure and that these kids go through, it's much harder. And I think it's something as well to reflect on, is that is university for everybody, right? Because I think
Yes.
in today's world,
Good point.
what I'm seeing anyway is that, you know, some of the trades and working with your hands and some of these things, you know, there's a lot of opportunity out there to do that. And I guess I worked in those positions when I was, you know, before university, and those are some of the fondest memories again that I did have. Is I worked for the city of Regina, putting underground sprinklers in and golf courses. It's a great job. I loved it. You know, I think sometimes for kids, it's not about simply going to university, because I don't think there's the jobs as well that are available with university education. I think, you know, your accounting and lawyers and doctors, there's jobs there. But I think just the generalist jobs, you know, the cost of university and everything, I think you also have to look at things and whatever you do something that you're going to enjoy, because you know what, you spend a lot of time of your life, you know, our careers, Richard, are what, 40 years now, 30, 40 years. Gosh, I'd hate to think I'd always been doing something I hated doing, because that's not what I would, you know, that's not what you want to do, and reflect later on in life that you wish you would have done something else. So pick some things that you enjoy, but you still need to make money as well.
True, it's a balance. But also I might say, you know, you started as an accountant. I studied as a chemist, and neither of us seem to really do those. So it doesn't, just because you go into one thing doesn't mean you have to stay there forever. And I think many careers these days will be one of multiple careers rather than one. But it's good advice to not just go to university for the sake of going. Go there because you really want to go and study something that I would say leads to something where you're not going to go broke or, you know, live off your parents. So that's good advice, Darcy. Darcy, do you think, I mean, there's a lot of questions asked about, you know, this nature nurture thing. What do you think? Do you think leadership, being a leader, is something that you're born with, or do you think it's something that can be developed? It is a sliding scale, and it's a difficult question, but what would you say to people who ask you that question?
Well, I think it is a great question, and I think it can be a little bit controversial, and you know, and even in my world where I'm, you know, in the past I was selling human capital solutions and how you develop leaders and all this. You know, I do think there's an inherent side to this, right? That you know, there is natural born leaders. I guess your last question, you know, which I didn't answer, was you know, was I extroverted as a youngster? And the reality was, no, I wasn't. I was quite introverted. You know, at school I sat in the back. I didn't talk a lot. I remember, you know, you had chemistry and physics, so you were one of those guys. I was always the guy that said, "I'll turn the light switch off." Right? I didn't want to be involved in the presentation. I didn't want to be involved in the lab. Even, you know, back in the day when you had to present reports and get in front of a class, I used to do the typing, because back then the typewriter. I would type it. I wouldn't get in front of the people. So I don't think you have to be an extrovert when you're 12 years old to define whether you're because I was just to me, I guess A, I wasn't interested, but B, I was a bit shy, and I didn't know how to get in front of people. And I know people now think, oh, come on, Darcy, you're always in front of crowds and things and talking, but that wasn't natural. I mean, that is something that was developed, and that was beyond, that wasn't even in university. Was I one of those people at university that was up in front of the people? It was really through my career. And I think, when you're passionate about something and you're excited about it, it's really easy to talk about. And it's really easy to be infectious to people, to get them to see what you're passionate about. And so that I think is, can you train in it? Yes. But I think a lot of the most successful, entrepreneurs and extroverts, they were born with it to a certain degree. And I do think I found it was hard to teach people, and frustrating. And I think that's where sometimes, position yourself in a place that you're most comfortable with. Extend yourself, challenge yourself. You may find you are an extrovert and you are a good public speaker and you do have that charisma in front of a room. But if you don't, it's also okay. Just be really good at what you're doing. Not everybody needs to be the big mouth in the front of the room. Because I got lots of guys behind me that are doing a great job, that are also paid very well, but just don't have that charisma, and that, like I said, is something I think can be hard to teach people. And I know there's many types of Robert Powers and these
Yep.
different techniques, but I think it's really more about your comfort with the topic, your passion for the topic, and just let that be what goes forward. Don't read a script. As you know, Richard, I've never read a script in my life. You used to give me those presentations and say, what are you going to say? And I'd say, well, here's my slides, but God only knows what I will really say.
That's good to hear. It's interesting how many, we've been doing these podcasts for a little while now, and most of the people who are, pretty senior, very senior leaders across the Asia region would call themselves introverts rather than extroverts, even though they've learned the skills. And I certainly too, I was extremely shy and had to develop these skills. So if people listening who feel shy and they're talked over by other more extroverted people, and believe me, these are skills that you can learn and you can improve on, and most people do, it seems. So that's really good to hear, Darcy. Now, Darcy, maybe if I could go to a different subject. You've always been an athletic fellow and cared about your health, all that kind of stuff, but you work long hours. You have worked in very demanding roles, traveling a lot. So it's hard to maintain your physical condition, and even eating properly when you're traveling is not easy. Do you have some health, is there a special food and exercise programs that you try to follow, and how successful are you at following them, Darcy?
Well, I think, that's a great question, Richard. And I think it's something when you're young, you don't think about. Right?
Yes.
And I know when I was, in my early career, it was all about work hard, play hard. God, we were out till 4 a.m. and up at 6 and out doing the cocktails and the business development stuff and that's great, because when you're young, you can get away with it a little bit, but you do have to take care of yourself. And again, I don't want to sound like the old guy now, but I am going to sound like the old guy. Is you do need to take care of yourself, because I don't know if you remember, but by the time NGA, I put in 10 years of really hard work building that.
Sure.
And I was in planes 200 plus days of the year. To your point, not eating very good, lunches, dinners. So a certain moment, I got in a scale it was in Manila, and I stepped on it, and this thing started spinning, and and the nurse said, "Wow, we've never seen it spin like that." And it came up, and I was 300 pounds.
Oh God!
And
imagine you, Darcy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was shocked, because I had always said, my pants are shrinking, all these, and of course my belts were shrinking, everything was shrinking. No, they weren't. I was getting fatter and fatter. And I think it is something that you do need to take care of yourself. When you're young, you can get away with it. There's no question. And I won't tell a young guy, don't go out there and have those years, because they were good, fun years. But eventually they caught up, and that's where I think sometimes you do have to be careful and eat better. And I guess my saving grace is I always like to eat whatever I want and drink whatever I want, but exercise is the thing that I guess I found what was my counterbalance. As long as I exercised enough and you get your cardio up high enough that you can burn, and you find your balance. I was lucky enough, I got into kickboxing when I hit 50, because that's when I got really fat. And
Sure.
And again, the beauty of Manila is I had it's another really great trainer, right? And only in Manila can we have these things. We're very privileged that way and lucky. And his name was Jarek, and he's been around me for, again, 10 years, really part of my extended group. When I have executives come into Manila and I can see they're getting worked down, and you need somebody to work with you. I tell them you got to get Jarek, because it's not just a workout in a gym and pedaling on a bike or something. It's boxing and kickboxing, and it's something that for me was a good offset. But take care of yourself, because I think, Richard, you and I have also seen people that over our careers who didn't, sometimes life is short. You don't want to shorten it any more than you have to. And I personally I've dealt with Crohn's disease. I've had for decades, and
really,
and so when I don't feel good, I know what it is, and it's because I'm not eating right. I'm not doing some things, and it's important to take care of yourself. And you also know I was a very heavy smoker for many decades. I proudly smoked 3 packs a day, and of course in the Philippines, cigarettes are cheap, right? So, but it's actually almost 1 year to the day that I quit smoking. I guess
Bravo.
if there's anything good of COVID, was, every morning, I would listen to symptoms of COVID: shortness of breath, coughing, all these. And I used to think every morning when I get up, I have shortness of breath, I cough. And it was starting to give me anxiety, thinking I had COVID all the time. And that's when I decided, and because of my kids and everything else, that, okay, I've had a great run. I smoked more cigarettes than any human ever could. Cold turkey gave it up. I guess as I jokingly told my kids, when I turn 70, I'm going to start smoking again, which I probably won't do.
I know. Well done. That's quite an achievement, Darcy. I had forgotten about that as well. So, well done. Now, Darcy, you mentioned your kids different times. And now you are known as a a good father. You've really spent a lot of time with your kids, sports, their schooling. I mean, it seems like you're active in almost every part of their lives. What would be some of your advice on raising children while developing, a senior management career? Maybe advice, because kids today, it's different from when we were young, of course. They've got their faces in screens, or they could have faces in their screens all day long, unless you try to do something to pull them out. How do you manage with your kids so well, Darcy? What's your advice?
Yeah, and again, I think it's those things you reflect on later. And I remember when I was a young executive, and I didn't have kids, and I remember I'd be very demanding on my fellow managers,
Yes.
because we have meetings at night, we have, we got long days, work hard, play hard,
Right.
and I think back, that I have some empathy and some I actually feel a little bit that I pushed people very hard back then, and can truly understand now, that trade-off, especially for younger parents as you're building your career. And I think it is important, as Richard, and I think most parents know that, that time is fleeting, it goes fast. You do want to spend that time and effort. I guess I had my kids a little bit later, so I had an advantage in that, financially,
Yes.
I wasn't worrying about paying every bill, and my time, I guess, as an entrepreneur was, again, I could dictate my time. And in fact, when I left NGA, it was very much a specific decision to say I couldn't work the 200 days a year in planes and stuff, and that I wanted to spend that time with my kids. So I think, there are some times too where you will have to make fundamental decisions about your career that impact your family and your children. And I guess my take is I wouldn't want to ever have to have any any reflection that I didn't give my kids everything I could. I've been lucky though, and for young executives, it's going to be hard, and there's going to be days you're going to give up things to be at work, but then you're also going to hopefully have some money in the bank so you can buy them a new a new basketball or a new pair of cleats for football or something. So
yeah,
I think you have to be realistic, but I guess when you really look at your legacy, and I think I always look at Steve Jobs, right? When he was passing, he did say, what, if I had to, have any changes, I wish I would have spent more time with my family. So yeah. I think it's always good to remember that and invest in them the same way you invest in your business.
Yeah. Okay. Good advice. Darcy, women, there's been reports that women have found you attractive over the years. What advice would you have for young guys? How do you work with women, and what advice would you have that you've learned over the years about living with women?
Boy, this is a double-edged sword, isn't it, Richard?
It is.
Well, I think, one thing that I think is well we're saying to young managers and executives that may be coming out is, and that I have always lived by, and I think is important, is, many people meet the loves of their life, and relationships are born out of a corporate environment, right? Because
yes, true.
You do meet people there. It's such a big part of your life. But the one thing that I guess I've always been very adamant about and have no patience for is utilizing the power that you may have as a businessman or business person in your work environment. So,
I see.
I think, when you're young and I do see people doing stupid things and jeopardizing careers and stuff. Don't do it. When you are a manager on top of people and you have that authority and that power, keep that separate. And I proudly state, I used to be able to promote, young ladies, for instance, that, I used to have some people accuse me of, oh, well, you promote her because she's pretty or you must have something going on. And you know what, I could always say, nah, she's getting the job because she earned the job. So, that's one of the things I think I've done very well in my life, is never had any controversy, no whisperings of any harassments or anything like that, because I'm also very hard on people who try to play that power game, whether it be, gender or race or anything. I have no time for it. Great people deserve great treatment. People who are not so good should be dealt with accordingly, and that's simple enough. I guess the relationship side, I think if you asked my parents, they would say I had a great career in business.
Nice.
My personal life has been slightly bumpier over the years, but I guess I have had some bumps in the road, and I think it's again something that many people have, and
True.
I think I've been very lucky in that the last 8 years I've been with a wonderful lady in the Philippines, and we've found she has a very nice career in fashion and does some things, I guess what I wanted, you want to be happy with the people, in your relationships in life, and it's not easy, and as a career person, it's not easy, I'm not so sure I was as popular as you portray, Richard, with the ladies, but thank you for that. It's it's certainly something that you've been blessed with Rebecca. You've been very lucky to have that partner, and I think that's one of the things that sometimes I wish I had, is that partner in life, through children and all the other things where you share the good days, but also share the bad days with somebody. And, that's where, it's wonderful to have that life partner. I haven't had as traditional one, but, you know what you do? You do the best damn job you can.
Yep.
With the cards that come at you. And that's where, I oftentimes say no regrets about my children. It's the greatest thing in my life. And no matter what happens in through those relationships, that offspring have been the blessing for me. So I'm so very happy to have my kids.
Sure. And like you said, Darcy, bumps in the road, these are normal. A lot of people think it's the end of the world if the relationship gets into trouble. But boy, it's normal. Let me tell you, I've been married for 25 years, and I could tell you a wonderful, I would never, ever not want to be married to the person I married, but there's still going to be these challenges for everybody, however traditional or not you are. So that's good advice, I think, for anybody. Darcy, you have a lot of experience, across the world in different business, and you see a lot of technology trends and so forth. What would you say are some of the key opportunities ahead for well, let's say the global economy, how we are going to be working different, which industries are you more excited about and others not so much? What kind of, what do you think about with this these days? I mean, the COVID, sorry, I'm talking too much here, but COVID, everyone says, has moved ahead a lot of these trends for work from home, for instance, work from anywhere. You know, we've moved 5 years in the past 5 months, or these kinds of things you hear. What do you think about all that? What's going to change, Darcy?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. This disruption that none of us could have predicted, and I do think it's going to have impacts in the way we live, in the way we work. It's a very reflective time, I think, for all of us in terms of what, and for instance, the work from home. Does that have any impact in my businesses? Oh, absolutely. For Figari, it does. But do I foresee a time where everybody will just work from home? I don't believe that's what's going to happen. I believe humans are social creatures. I believe the interaction between people is still very, very important. And in fact, I'm hoping that's the case. With the gadgets in today's world, and I think people like yourself and myself, whilst we use those gadgets ourselves a lot, and we could be also very much accused of our noses stuck in our phones all the time, and so when we complain about our kids doing it, sometimes we have to look in the mirror because we're doing it as well. But with COVID, there's this trend that says we're all going to sit in a bubble and we're all going to sit in the house and never come out, and we're going to have Zoom parties, and I guess I'm really hoping it's not the case. I need human interaction myself. I think we wonder about the new generation. Do they? I think they do. I think sitting in their rooms, interacting and is just not the same. And so I'd like to think that when it's going to take a while to get over this whole pandemic. I think it's 2022 before we even get back to what is going to be the new rules, because do we get a vaccine? Do we travel around? What are the rules? What's going to happen with globalization? Because let's face it, we were a very globalized, and in fact, the digital era was more than globalized. It was a digital area, and I think it's we are going to see the continued development of the digital era, and changes of behavior are going to occur. So again, because I'm in the resort industry as well, and F&B, do I believe that we're ever going to have as many restaurants as we did before? Probably not. I do think people have learned they can cook at home, they can do things, they can, there's different ways to entertain yourselves. But I think the trend is very much going to be a digital lead, in terms of awareness and the digitization of what is the strategy and what are the opportunities out there. But I'd like to think that, we still will retain a brick and mortar existence, and that humans will demand interaction. We grew up remember the days of Big Brother, and this is all science fiction. This has really come into our lives in a way I don't think we ever dreamed of, Richard. And I think it's, with what you've seen in the U.S. with the elections down there, and the divide of people. There's 50% of people see things one way and 50% another. And I think there's some, the political correctness and some of the things that we're going to deal with, and I'm sure you're seeing it. We see much more of this in Canada than we would see in the Asian markets.
Yep.
And I'd like to think that we can just get back to a way that is more productive for all humans, and less on the divisiveness that we can all reflect on and blame our elders and hundreds of years ago things that weren't done right. You know what? The people 100 years ago did the best they could at the time with what they knew. It doesn't mean it fit in today's society, but I don't think we need to tear down our history and the lessons learned that we can take from those times. And in terms of trends, it's you look at the Amazons, you look at my goodness, the malls. You think about the malls in Manila, the investments of these brick and mortar buildings, and oh my goodness, I must admit, in Canada, I have barely shopped for anything. I just get cardboard boxes from from Amazon that come to my doorstep. So let's face it, that's a supply chain optimization that started. To be honest, I used to take customers to Dell back in the late 90s, when you could order a desktop, a configured desktop just the way you wanted, and it would get delivered to your house. And that was crazy stuff back in the 90s.
It was.
But you know what? Fundamentally, that supply chain that was created by Michael Dell is no different than what Amazon has just done. It just, the scale is amazing.
Yes, it is.
But what I do hope to see is that countries retain some level of local development. I think globalization perhaps went too far, where we now rely on people outside of our borders that may or may not have our best interests at heart. So I do think we'll have a tuning down of that globalization, and I'll use Canada as an example. Is that Canada should make their own vaccine? Why
Yes.
can we not make our own vaccine, right? Why do we ship our cattle to the US to have them slaughtered, and then we put them in bags of beef jerky and send them back to Canada? Let's keep our core resources in country and be self-sufficient. And I think we can take the same model to the Philippines, right? I mean, the Philippines, also have some decent resource bases. Let's develop them so that we're not importing, things, rice. We don't need to import food. There are ways, I think, that we could develop industries that support your baseline infrastructure, so that if these things happen, that countries can survive without relying on other globalization supply chain issues. And so I think there's going to be a recalibration of that. I unfortunately think there's going to be our children are probably going to have to pay for all this to a certain extent. All this money, right, that's being created, and people are still eating, and even though they're not working, and it's it has broken every economic rule that I ever learned in my economics class.
True.
So I think we're going to have to see what is going to happen in this next evolution. The stock markets have stayed, relative. We have cyber currencies going on, cryptocurrencies, right? if governments start to default, are those things going to come into play? So I think it's going to be interesting times as we get through this post-COVID era. I think we're all going to get through it. I think in 1917, during the Spanish flu, those people got through it, and they didn't have vaccines and the scientists we have today. So I think we will get through it, but it's still I think going to be very disruptive, and there's going to be some winners and losers out of this. And I guess that's to your point, do you get into the right channels to make sure that you're on the right path to the future? And boy, I wish I had a crystal ball, because I bet you could make a lot of money. But you look at things like Bitcoin. I've got all my friends. I don't know about you, Richard. Everybody, you gotta get your Bitcoin. You're gonna get $1 million tomorrow. And I guess I've just never believed that happens, right? But it's again looking at these new trends and what is going to happen. And I guess you have to be so careful with some of the scams and things that exist. It's very, very scary. My credit cards keep getting. I got to get a new credit card every 3 months, because you do these online shopping and stuff, and then it's compromised. They send you another card, and it's getting harder and harder to really address the day-to-day security. So let's hope that continues, and I think let's face it, this whole COVID thing has put us all equal. As a society, the Philippines is no different than Canada, right? We both get it.
Yeah.
We both have to deal with it. I guess it's just a little bit tougher in a society with far less means. But even at this point, Canada's printing money as well. I mean,
True.
Where is this money coming from, and how is it going to get paid back? It's going to be interesting.
But like you said, we are doing a lot better handling these kinds of pandemics. You mentioned the Spanish flu, when people died by the millions. And it wasn't really that long time ago, if you think about it, whereas this one, we're handling it much, much better than we used to. And through all of history, you read, and boy, these pandemics come through on a regular basis and can take out 10, 20% of the population. So by comparison, this is not, but yeah, Philippines has special situations, as does all emerging countries, Darcy. Now, you seem to have big, high regard for Filipinos and the country of Philippines. Certainly you've spent a lot of your life there and committed a lot to the country. What do you think are some of the biggest opportunities ahead for the Philippines over the next 5 or 10 years? Darcy, what do you see for Philippines in particular?
Well, again, I think some of the path forward is already, the development. I think of infrastructure is key. In the Philippines, which can again sustain the population and the baseline. I do believe tourism is going to come back. So yes. I still, and that I've many times said it, it's the most underutilized resource the Philippines has. I'm very proud of my resort and the fact that I believe we're at an international level. But I always used to go to Thailand, and Thailand really they have a great tourism industry, and I always said, why the Philippines? We have all these islands, we have the English as a language. There's and people say, oh, but there's no history. There's great history in the Philippines. There's so much history to know and learn, and I think what I am seeing is that I think the Philippines, and in the 21 years I've been there, I'm sure, Richard, you've seen it. I have seen a light come on where the Filipino is a more proud person than they were 20 years ago. And I'm happy for that because, I used to berate some of the foreigners and the way they would treat Filipinos at times in the Philippines, which I used to think was disgusting. And, what I do hope, though, is that you don't, and this is a little bit this whole divisiveness, that you don't have a reaction that, makes it uncomfortable for say foreign investment to come in because of that pride and that wanting to right some wrongs that may have happened in the past and things, but that we all work together, because I think that is one of the greatest strengths of the Philippines, is that ability to collaborate, work together. You see it in Canada here. Who are some of the most popular, and I call them immigrants?
Sure.
Everybody loves the Filipinos in Canada, right? Why? Because they're happy. They work hard. They don't. They're not miserable people, right? They're very happy. They appreciate what's in front of them, and I'd like to think that the Philippines can still be the tiger that we have seen, and I think, Richard, you and Rebecca have been great in promoting that. The growth was great, huh? Even through some of the challenges and some of the debates about political situations and whatnot. But I think none of us have the answer to that. The Americans don't have the answer. So the Chinese don't have the answer. The Russians don't have the answer. I think this is where it's nice that you let the countries themselves build upon their own culture and their own society, but be open to having people collaborate and optimize the opportunities that are there. But the Philippines certainly should be get back onto revitalizing some of the industries. BPO has been just amazing, I think, Richard. Yes. Isn't it really? BPO has really, I think, sustained the Philippines through COVID. And I must say, I'm so proud of the fact that, so many countries in the world still are relying on those call centers. and those Filipinos are still answering the calls, happy about it, doing a great job.
Doing it. Yep.
It's truly amazing, because I don't think you'd see the same thing in many other cultures. Blessed that we are to have the BPO industry in the Philippines.
We are. I got really concerned when the Chinese casino online gaming operator started to leave en masse, and they made a great contribution, but they really had a hard time remaining. And you're right. What has maintained us is the BPO industry. I was surprised to hear, I spoke with the guy who runs Concentrix a week or two ago, but they just hit 100,000 people in the country. Also, our friend over at the PayPal operation, he was saying Philippines is the gem of the country. Virtually all the growth during all of their huge, everybody started to use PayPal a lot more during the pandemic, and all their growth was in Philippines. So he was run off his feet because of the great results in Philippines. So like you said, it really is such an amazing industry and a big, and you've played a part of that as well, certainly, Darcy. Darcy, this has been a really good session. What's about you for the future personally, Darcy? Are you done with your starting new businesses thing, and you're just going to manage the ones you have, or is it still full speed ahead? What are your plans for the future, Darcy?
Well, I think it's one of the things, again, we've all had time to reflect through this pandemic, sure. And really think about, what it is we want to do. So I love doing what I do, and I think by having spent a little bit of time out of the Philippines, I do realize that I really do want to continue running my businesses in the Philippines, and I think more so, as I mentioned before, what I want to try to do is focus a little bit more on a legacy. So I'm hoping to do some crazy things, like maybe I'm going to build a world-class ice hockey rink in Alabang and call it the Lalonde Center or something. And so I'm gonna keep building, and I'm gonna keep. I think I kind of thought, am I just gonna wind down? You know what, Richard? What I realize is this boy is not winding down at all. I can't wait. I've got a couple of new startups that I'm looking at, and they are Philippine startups. So they're Philippine businesses that want to now go, regional and global, and so I'm looking forward to getting back in the saddle again. Amazingly, there's money to invest, right? These investment people, they're coming around and they want to build some businesses, and I think that's great, because that's the stuff we're going to need to fuel things again, and get them going. So yeah, I'm gonna keep pushing Figari and Kahuna, but stay tuned. I think in the next 6 to 12 months, you'll hear that Darcy's gonna do some more things, and as much as I'd love to be able to do them in Canada, it's too difficult to do business in Canada, frankly. So there's an example of, I still think Asia is really that frontier of entrepreneurship. It's the opportunity is there, the cost base is there, and the opportunity to succeed is much higher than trying to start something up in Canada. It's not easy here. Sure. And I think I see it more and more, and I've learned a lot about taxation in Canada again, and that's certainly interesting. So
I'd like to talk to you about that sometime too. Yeah, okay, but not today though. Not today.
But I'm really looking forward to unfortunately with COVID, I think we've all had to, as I say, that the thing I'm most frustrated with COVID is that this pandemic has blown every plan and strategy that I spent a lifetime putting together. It's really blown out the window to many respects. But you know what? That's just the challenge, and let's now look at what the opportunities are, but I guess none of us put really long-term plans together right now, because it is so very difficult to plan anything right now. But I do hope by the end of this year we can, because that's one of the questions. Does the globalization, the international businessmen like you and I, do we exist anymore? Because do we get one passport or one location and we have to stay there, and we can't get on a plane and fly all over the place? And so these are, I think some of the, do we need to fly all over the place? I guess that's the question.
Good question.
So now I happen to think there's a happy medium, right? And
yes.
As you know, the last years, I haven't been flying around all over, and I found I could run businesses perfectly fine. So there is probably a happy medium, but my kids are getting into high school now, and I got to figure out what schools they're going to go to, and I guess that's one of the challenges as well in the Philippines, is really, again, even for the international schools, which are still on remote schooling, what are the alternatives as we move ahead for kids going through schooling, graduating high school, getting into university, boy, this is tough, huh? This is really
Sure.
hard on this generation. So I'm going to have to balance off and figure out. My kids were in an international school in the Philippines and loved it. They are now going to school here in Canada because they get to go to school. They get to go to a classroom. Whereas in Manila, our friends have been, more than 1 year now of remote schooling, which is
Interesting.
Which is tough. Huh?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Hopefully next term they can figure out what's going to be best in terms of getting the kids back in the classroom.
Okay, Darcy. Whew, that was a good session.
Okay, well, hopefully can give some insight in some young people, because that's really something that excites me, and for the people that I've worked with in the region that I'm so proud of, and I think you appreciate these people more through what we've just gone through. Those friendships, those partnerships. Even yourselves, I probably have stayed in touch with you as much. Well, we've been out of the country as we did when we were in the country.
Good point.
And I think it's. I think you appreciate more things that you took for granted, and something that I'm looking forward to perhaps a renewed passion to really enjoy every moment that we have on this great earth.
Correct. We look forward to it. And I got to say, Darcy, Rebecca and I, we've always been really proud of the things you've done in Philippines. It's always been nice to point to, as a Canadian guy, to you and say, well, other Canadians have done well. Oh, really? Who? Well, let me, and you're always, at the top of the list or close to it. So, Darcy, we'll look forward to seeing what you come up with next, and let us know if we can help promote it for you or whatever. But however you comes about, Darcy. But yeah, it was a good session, Darcy. Well, thank you. That was this edition of Going Deep with me, Richard Mills. We interviewed such an interesting fellow. Darcy Lalonde was with us today. So thank you. We'll see you for the next edition of Going Deep with me, Richard Mills. Thank you.